Thank you, Kate, and good evening, everybody. I'm very pleased to be here and would like to thank the UNU Water Center for inviting me for this particular talk on Sustainable Development Goals and Sustainable Development Governance in Post-2015 Development Era. As you all know, what I'm going to try in my presentation is that there is a lot of information with regard to the process, and there is a lot of information with regard to the contents. And my understanding is that a lot of people are not really interested in the UN processes, so I will try as much as to cut down the processes and basically would focus on the contents, what really is coming out of those processes rather than how those processes are basically shaping themselves. So to start with some introductory remarks, I wanted to talk about post-2015 development agenda. And usually a mistake is made when people talk about post-2015 development agenda, then there is a term people tend to mix post-2015 development agenda with the SDGs. But just wanted to start with clarify this point that these are two purely independent processes. SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, which was mandated at Rio +20, which took place in the summer of 2012 at Rio. And the post-2015 development agenda was mandated by the General Assembly in 2010 because they recognized that in 2015 we would be through with the Millennium Development Goals date, and then what's next after 2015. So just that little clarification, I wanted to do that. And then with regard to the Sustainable Development Governance, because over the last 20 years, the governance was mainly the mandate of the Commission on Sustainable Development, which you might be familiar with, but that commission has ceased to function as of last year, September, and so a new mechanism has been placed. So I will just try to inform you that what is the difference between the old mechanism and the new mechanism, and as a global community, how can we expect that the new mechanism would deliver what the old mechanism has not been able to deliver. And finally, the means of implementations basically serve as a bridge between the good governance and the agenda. Then I would speak about some few very important conditions which are necessary to achieve the post-2015 development agenda. And finally, I would have few concluding remarks, and then we will open up for the questions and answers. Many people, I'm not going to repeat all of this or read this, I just kept this slide here that, this sort of lists the main agreements which were reached at the Rio +20 in summer of 2012, and the two red things which you are seeing is those are the exactly kind of things which I'm just going to speak today. One is with regard to the process of Sustainable Development Goal establishment because they would replace the MDGs, and the second one was with regard to the high-level political forum on sustainable development, which has already been done in September 2013, last GA session, and has started to work, and its first session would be in 2016. Then there is a whole list of other processes and initiatives and commitments which were agreed at the Rio +20. Now, Sustainable Development Goals, the first process or the subject matter of our discussion, why we are looking for Sustainable Development Goals and what's the need for this thing. We know that first thing is that MDG business is coming to end in 2015, and so there are a lot of positive experiences and lessons we have learned from the MDG process. and then we would like to carry those into the post-2015 development era. Basically, if you look at the positive side of the MDGs, they were very easy to translate, they were very easy to understand at the country level. They helped a great deal in mobilizing the resources, what is needed to achieve those, and so there was a lot of political commitment behind those goals to be achieved. And all in all, basically, once you put all the MDGs together, basically a number of countries, those really helped in pushing the envelope of the development agenda further. Then at the same time, today's world is much different than what was in year 2000 when MDGs were adopted. Because I'm sure you know that the MDGs came out of the Millennium Declaration or the Millennium Summit, which took place in year 2000. Now, a number of new major issues have come up, and those also needs to be addressed in the post-2015 development era. Some of those are could be built around the 5 pillars, and the first is the climate change and adaptation, which has to be explicitly recognized in the post-2015 development agenda or in the SDGs, and it has to run across all the SDGs. The second pillar is the investment in low carbon infrastructure, and the third one, which is very important, is to have a due respect to the planetary boundaries, because with all this growth and so we are touching the limits in many of the natural resources, so we need to make sure that we are sustainable in terms of using our natural resources. And the fourth one is the sustainable consumption and production pattern, which is very closely linked to what I already said about the planetary boundaries, that you need to follow those sustainable consumption and production patterns to be able to stay within the boundaries of the planet and the natural resources. And finally, the protection of the global commons like atmosphere, like oceans, like high tides, and so on and so forth. And third issue is the issue of the universality. Many of you know that the MDGs were basically only meant for the developing countries. But here, the SDGs, as we get into the SDGs process, basically SDGs are equally applicable to the developed countries and to the developing countries. They both have to report on the progress of those things. But the key difference here is that when you do, for instance, the mapping of the MDGs at the national level, what countries try to do at a national level, they were trying, okay, if we need to reduce the number of people who do not have access to water to half, so everybody tried to do the same thing. So by this time, what happened was that, for instance, in countries like, for instance, India or a country like China, when they achieved an absolute number, they provided these services both to the safe drinking water or to the water from the improved sources. Basically, the MDG was met. But at the same time, the fact remains that there are a lot of countries in the world who have also not met the MDGs. So this time, basically, under the SDG thinking, the idea is that basically each country is going to be free in setting their own targets according to their own socio-economic conditions, according to their national policies, and they will choose also their own strategies and paths, how they would like to achieve those targets on a time scale. But so this is more in line with the principle of common but differentiated responsibility principle. So this is the kind of framework which is basically leading us towards these sustainable development goals. Now the next question comes basically on why SDG on water, because here I know that we are sitting here in a water center here, and we have more concerns about the water. So I have listed here, there are many reasons why there should be an SDG on water, but I have listed here only 4, which I thought are more crucial and more important. One is the role of water in poverty eradication and the development. And there are a lot of case studies and ample evidence that have demonstrated that this could be done not only by providing, let's say, direct access to water for drinking purposes, but also through health, through education, through agriculture. Water makes these contributions towards poverty eradication. Second thing is the achieving MDGs and beyond, and I just explained a little bit below that the last time during the MDG, the target was just to provide access to half of those who did not have the access. But as we move into a more universal goal, means water for all, sanitation for all, that is going to pose a bigger and more important challenges. And so that is going to be the second reason that we need an SDG on water. Third one is the increasing water scarcity and climate change. And we all know that climate change is there. We all know that on the one hand, the demand for water is increasing because of the population increase, because of the increase in food due to increased population, and it will need more water. But on the other hand, what we see is that because of the climate change, basically there is a lot much on water variability, and in many areas are also witnessing the water scarcity. And some of the data also shows that there are about 1.4 billion people who are living in closed basins. Closed basins means where the abstractions are more than the recharge. We are taking more water than the water is really going there into the basins. So we are in a stage of mining, but if the current trends are not reversed, the situation get more worse. And finally, the changes in the political and economic landscapes. Over the last decade, we have also seen in many countries there has been a good growth, good development. And with good growth and good development, what comes is the people's standard of living has increased. And with increased standard of living, basically the demand for water has also increased. So then the next one would be, okay, how should the SDG should look like? I just wanted to take you a minute back about the MDG on water. On MDG on water, the situation was basically there was no specific MDG on water. There was no specific MDG on sanitation. Those were 2 targets which were basically placed under the goal on environmental sustainability. So the MDG was more on environmental sustainability, and underneath those were the targets. But the current thinking and the debate and the writings you see on the subject, basically they are saying there should be some standalone water because of the reason I already expressed, its role in the contribution in poverty reduction, the increasing water scarcity, dealing with the climate change issues and other issues with regard to the changes in political and economic landscape. So there is a consensus that there should be a standalone goal. Now, standalone goal can take 2 shapes, 2 forms. One is a sector-wide approach, and the other one is an economy-wide or nexus approach. Sector-wide approach is basically we are calling for something like expanding the existing targets into a goal, like water for all, sanitation for all, and health for all, the WASH goal, and we are also including into water resources planning and management, which was not explicitly part of the MDG, but it was part of the Agenda 21. If you go back 20 years, I mean, you could see it there. And there was also a reference to planning and management of water resources into Johannesburg Plan of Implementation as well, very explicitly. So the one school of thought is saying that basically the standalone goal should basically have all these elements, the WASH, the water resources management, and the pollution control and wastewater management. But it's more like generally a water-based concept rather than the poverty concept. It's not yet clear that if you put all these elements into a goal, how they would basically be interconnected. But one would assume that if you have the integrated water resources management planning into the center of this thing, probably it would tie together these goals. The economy-wide or nexus approach is different. It's basically drawn from the country-led national process, planning processes, whether in the form of the poverty reduction strategy papers or whether in the form of national sustainable development strategies or national development plans. So the main theme is given there that what country wants to do. They want to reduce poverty, they want to increase growth, they want to achieve equality, and so on and so forth. So basically that's how this economy-wide or nexus approach is basically trying to support that. And the other thing is because of the nexus, because it's more multi-sectoral, because water contributes in agriculture, in energy, in health, in education. So you are able to track down water's contributions, not only, okay, you have provided X number of people the amount of water, but how it's contributing to the other sectors of the economy as well. So it's a much broader concept. But whatever case may be, whether it's a sector-wide approach or it's a nexus-wide approach, one thing is very clear, and that thing is that the water resources management has to play a very critical role in both of these. And within the water resources management agriculture, essentially, within water resources management agriculture would be very important because that's the sector which is using about 70% or more water in many economies. But on the other hand, what we have is that under these both approaches, what you see is that these are the kind of targets. I just have listed these targets. Basically, these are the targets which are being discussed, that these targets should basically be constituted under the water goal or standalone goal, no matter which approach you want to have it, whether it's a sector-wide approach or you want to have it nexus approach, like enhancing access to the services on a sustained basis, on a long-term basis, reliable services, and then improving the resource development and management, reducing pollution, reducing impact of disaster, enhancing water cooperation and improving water governance. So my assessment of these targets is essentially that probably the first three targets would essentially get into the water goal, no matter which shape we take it. With regard to disasters, I'm not so sure because there is a separate cluster which is also being discussed under the SDG framework, that disaster and risk reduction, that is the kind of theme. So probably all the disasters, whether those are water-related or not water-related disasters, probably would be kept it there. And on water cooperation, it's still a kind of a very subjective, and we don't know what kind of target you could set it under water cooperation. But since last year was the International Year of Water Cooperation, so there was a big momentum among the governments, that we need to have more cooperation around water issues. So probably that has taken a shape into this thing. So out of this couple of things are very clear. One thing which is very clear to me is that really the water agenda is much bigger than we originally thought, let's say at the time of MDGs or during the MDGs. It covers much more grounds. All these studies which have done so far, and I think I can count 3 or 4 studies. One is the study which is done by UNU and UNOSD in Korea. The second study has been done by the Sustainable Solution Development Network of Columbia University of Jeff Sachs. And the third study is the high-level panel of the Secretary General on Post-2015 Development Agenda. All these studies have basically came to this conclusion, other than the last 2, that the first 3 should really be building blocks of the water goal. So seems like we are moving in that direction. And on the water management side, as I mentioned, that if anything is to be done in the water management, it has to be done in the agriculture sector, because this is the sector which is consuming more than 70% of the water, and probably in coming years even the demand will be much more. But the sector is facing 3 critical challenges, and we need to figure out the ways how those challenges should be addressed. The first one basically deals with the economic, social, and demographic, where there are about, in 2050, we will have 9 billion people. And that 9 billion people would mean basically that there would be a need for 70% food and feed increase would be needed at that time. On the other hand, our both land and water resources are degrading for different reasons. So we need to adopt some kind of policies which could reverse these trends. It's not true that nothing is happening. I mean, a lot of things are happening on the ground with regard to the wise use and wise management of resources, but the pace is not there. I mean, so basically what we need to do is to accelerate the level of implementation. Then the second challenge is with regard to the increasing water stress. As I mentioned, that the rising temperature is a reality, and then you have to adapt to the changing temperatures. That's also a reality, but we are not adapting at a rate which we should be doing it. So that's one of the reasons. And one of the problem is lack of capacities, the technologies, the resources. But we hope with the start of the Green Climate Fund, which has become almost functional, it is based now in Korea, that probably the resources would be made available to the developing countries for the adaptation measures. And finally, challenges with the greenhouse gas emission mitigation. We know agriculture contributes about 15% and land clear area about 18%. So there are all again numerous models which have demonstrated that these trends could be reversed. But again, the issues of capacities and resources basically is not allowing us to move at a pace we should be. Now the next question is finally on this slide is basically moving from MDGs to SDGs, because we have run the MDG process now for 20 years now. A lot of lessons have been learned, a lot of experiences have been gained. There have been a lot of successes. There are also some failures too. So there are some issues which are very critical, and we need to make sure that those issues are addressed as we move into the SDG era in post-2015 development era. One is the universality issue, and I also talked about very briefly that this essentially means that these goals would be both for developed and developing countries, and they both will have to report on the progress of this. And each country, according to the principle of common but differentiated responsibility, will have to set their own targets, will have to set their own strategies, will have to set their own paths, will have to set their own pace. How do they want to go about it? And this was not the case in the MDG. Second is the positioning of the targets. That remember last in the MDG, I briefly mentioned that both targets on water and sanitation were basically placed under the environmental sustainability goal. A lot of people think that that was really not a right thing to do. It might have been a better idea to place them under the health goal or some other goal, because then you would have been able to establish a more direct relevance to the overall goal. Definitional issues, we have been over the last 20 years caught with these definitions. What is safe water? What is water from improved sources or adequate water? So these are all subjective statements. But as we move into the post-2015 development era, I think the focus should be more on a safe water, because one of the thinking is also that when we say people have access from improved sources of waters, probably it's an overestimation vis-a-vis the people who have access to safe water. So the criteria should really be safe water rather than improved sources of water. Inequality in access, yes, it's a very important issue, whether you look at the rural-urban segments, whether you look even within the urban society, some areas are well served than the others. There is a gender issues involved here, and inequalities. Some geographic regions are also there are inequalities. And finally, the monitoring. Imagine, Adil will tell you that basically we have, in the water and sanitation sector, we have quite a systematic mechanism to monitor the progress with regard to the targets. There is a JMP, which is called Joint Monitoring Program, which is run jointly by UNICEF and WHO, and there is one GLASS project, which is a more summary of the GMP type, right? On the financial aspects. So, but monitoring is a very expensive and very tedious exercise. To monitor, at a village level or even at a local level, national level, regional level, global level, it's very challenging. And quite frankly, the governments don't want to be monitored. They don't like to be monitored. So it has to be in-country mechanism which will have to take care of this very important responsibility. Because if there is no good monitoring, there is no good reporting, and if there is no good reporting in the intergovernmental process, then there is no good decision making. And this is what we have seen in Commission on Sustainable Development, and I'll speak about it in a minute as well. And finally, this comprehensive and integration. One of the biggest failure, as the world claims with regard to the MDG, was that they were not able to integrate the 3 pillars of sustainable development. But here probably we will have this, because of the multi-sectoral nature of the SDGs, we will have be able to get hold of the this integration of 3 pillars of sustainable development. This is a diagram which is sort of shows how complex the sustainable development is. If you look that there are sectors involved in an economy, there might be 10, 15, 20, 30 sectors. So you have to note that. Then there are themes within each sector. There are different themes which could be cross-sectoral. And then there are scales which, because the actions needs to be taken at local level, at national level, at regional level, and global level. So it's not really very easy and straightforward. And I think, at least this is my understanding, because I was running the Commission on Sustainable Development for almost 10 years, And it is always a challenge. It is easy to say that we need to integrate the 3 pillars of sustainable development. But then you pick up something and try to do it, then it becomes very difficult. So I think as we move forward into post-2015 era, probably this is an issue on which we will have to have more discussion and debate and see how best we can ensure the integration of the 3 pillars. Now, with that, I just wanted to conclude the first part, which is with regard to the Sustainable Development Goals, and just wanted to move to very quickly to the Sustainable Development Governance part. That was the second process. In the very first slide, I have shown you in red that these were the 2 processes which were agreed at the Rio +20. The old mechanism, which was named, many of you must be familiar, was Commission on Sustainable Development. This commission was established in 1992 in the first Rio conference, and it survived for 20 years with all its good and bad. And basically, it was ceased its operation in September 2013, last General Assembly session. So, and the new mechanism is, I'm just going to come to what was the difference between the CSD and why it was considered or why it was closed. The new mechanism is called now as the High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development. So this was approved in September 2013, and it would start becoming operational and functional in 2016 when we have a 2015 development agenda in place. And then it would be responsible for the monitoring and review and implementation of that agenda. Now, general views of the CSD. There are a lot of people who have positive views, and generally there is another school of thought that, okay, the CSD really was not able to live up to its reputation. But one key thing is that it kept the Sustainable Development Agenda alive for almost 20 years. I think it's a remarkable thing for a mechanism like this. And at the same time, it contributed in setting the agenda of some important issues like oceans, like energy, like biodiversity, like forest, because the forest for Secretariat came out of this thing. And then another good thing was that it promoted a multi-stakeholder engagement in decision making. In all its sessions, there were civil society was present, UN agencies were present, international financial institutions were present, the governments, of course, were present. So there was more multi-stakeholder kind of engagement, and which was not before the CSD. It was not the norm of work within the UN system. It was only governments who would get together and make a decision. But CSD opened the doors to all the multi-stakeholders, all the stakeholders who have a stake in sustainable development. And I also mentioned this issue of it failed to integrate the 3 dimensions of sustainable development. And then there was a lot of criticism with regard to that, lack of progress on implementation. It's interesting to see that if you look at who is sitting in the Commission on Sustainable Development, this is a Commission of Sustainable Development. The governments are sitting, civil society is sitting, UN entities are sitting, international finance institutions are sitting. And after 1 week of debate, basically you come to a solution. And then you go back to your countries, your constituencies. And then those decisions are not implemented. Would you call that a failure of CSD? I would not. My position is very open on that. That is, it's not the CSD which failed in delivering its mandate, but it's the government basically who really failed the CSD. And we will see that how the new mechanism basically an effort has been made to correct that kind of thing. I'm just going to, there were two periods of the CSD, one before Johannesburg, one after Johannesburg, 10 years before Johannesburg, 10 years after Johannesburg. Before Johannesburg, basically, it was, by and large, its progress was okay, people were happy, a lot of ministers were coming to its session and it was making decision, although the state of implementation was slow, but still it was going on. But the performance after the Johannesburg was that essentially its work program was divided into multi-year cycle. Means each cycle of 2 years would pick up a set of issues. For example, agriculture, rural development, drought, land, desertification. So they would pick up a set of issues. And in 1 year, they would call a review year where they would review the progress, what has been done, what has the lessons been learned, what are the implementation constraints, and so on and so forth. And the second year, which was the policy year, then basically they would try to come up with a revised policy or how to address those constraints and the challenges. So it worked quite well. I remember in 2003, 2004, 2005, the first two sessions. First session was on water and sanitation. It worked very well. Second session was on energy. It failed. Failed means basically there was no decision reached by the government. And the third was on agriculture and rural development. That succeeded. And the fourth one was on sustainable consumption production pattern and mining and chemicals and so on, and it failed. So it was like a 50-50 success. But after that, I think people were generally of the view that there were poor linkages between the review and policy years. We really didn't know. There were a lot of duplications. People who would discuss the things in the review year, next year they would come and they would say the same thing. So basically, it was more like a wastage of time rather than covering the agenda in depth. And agenda was fixed for the 15 years after Johannesburg. Then after 2002, then the agenda was fixed for the next 15 years. So whatever new and emerging issues basically were coming up, like economic and financial crisis or the climate change or other issues which were of importance, basically it did not have the flexibility to include it in work program. And another very important point of its failure was that at a country level, basically ministries of environment, they became the owner of sustainable development agenda, which I think was a very big mistake. Ministry of Environment, when we talk about 3 pillars, Ministry of Environment is responsible only for one pillar, environment. But what about the other 2 pillars, which are like social and economic? So over a period, it became a sort of, if you keep on doing things for 2-3 years, it's just become a practice. So what we saw in the CSD sessions was only ministers of, session is on agriculture, on land degradation, or desertification, or rural development. But governments are represented by Minister of Environment. So this was something which everybody recognized, but they were not able to do anything somehow. And over a period of time, when they saw this thing, then within the UN system, the support to the Commission also declined because they were thinking that it's not going anywhere. And the major criticism, as I already mentioned, was on the lack of implementation, that CSD sometimes was not able to implement the decision its own decisions, which was some kind of shame. Now, I move on to this new mechanism. Lastly, on the high-level political forum on sustainable development. Basically, if you look at all these 4 functions, Actually, they are not very much different than what were the functions which were mandated to CST. It's almost the same thing. It's a little bit of words, but essentially, this forum is going to follow up the implementation of Sustainable Development Agenda, even whatever agenda would come after during the post-2015 development era. Now, what are the differences between the high-level political forum and the CST? High-level political forum has a universal membership. Its membership means that the whole world, all the countries which are the members of the UN, they are also member of this particular forum. Whereas in the CST case, there were about 53 countries, and then there were rotations. Every year there were 53 countries, and there was a membership for 3 years. Political commitment and support, here we expect, because of its organization of work, the way it has been structured. The way it has been structured is that every year there would be a meeting of the ministers under the ECOSOC, which is Economic and Social Organ of the United Nations. And that ministerial meeting is already there. It is called Ministerial Development Forum. But then eventually the program is that the Ministerial Development Forum would basically pick up the Sustainable Development Agenda and start reviewing it and take the responsibility of public policy making. That is one level. And every 4 years, then the Sustainable Development Agenda would be discussed by the heads of state during the first 2 days of the General Assembly session. So essentially they are trying to tie this whole Sustainable Development Agenda to the top political leadership so that there is a political commitment. This was not the case, by the way, with the CST. CST was more like a functional commission of ECOSOC. It will have the flexibility in terms of the agenda setting. As I said, CST had an agenda set for 15 years, but here it would have the flexibility in agenda setting. It could come every year during the ECOSOC session, or we have the tendency in UN that, on some specific issues when the General Assembly session starts, so there is some high-level events. So some of these issues could be taken up there. I just talked about the structure of sessions and organization, that how it would meet every year under the ECOSOC and every 4 years under the heads of the states. And since it's going to be a multi-sectoral agenda, because we expect when in the ECOSOC or when at the General Assembly level, ministers from all constituencies would come. It would not only be Minister of Environment who would be there, but the different ministers would come, and that would give us a hope that this multi-sectoral approach would basically allow us to integrate the 3 pillars of sustainable development. So we just talked about 2 things: the post-2015 development agenda, whatever shape it might take, and we also talked about the governance of sustainable development. And but one important thing is that I think in my presentation at some point I talked about issues like capacity building, resource mobilization, and technology transfer, and monitoring and reporting. So, on the capacity development it's a very, very challenging issue. Other day we were discussing that over the last 20, 30, 40 years, we are in the development field, and I have really not seen any project which does not have a component of capacity building. But even today, if you go to some of the developing countries, you figure out their big issue is that, lack of capacities to do certain things. So I think this capacity building issue needs to be think through in a much more careful way. than what we have done things in the past. In the past, we have also focused on, for instance, on the individuals more, but I think it's important that we need to focus our attention more on the organizations. And now with this multi-sectoral agenda, basically you also need a multi-sectoral knowledge. So access to knowledge needs to be made easy. But again, I mean, here we are sitting here everybody has an access to knowledge through network, through other sources, through computers. But if you go to developing countries, let's say a farmer in Burkina Faso would like to have a solution to some problem, where does he go? So this whole knowledge, there is huge knowledge exists there, but that knowledge is somehow not getting transferred to the end user. So there is a problem, we need to address that as well. And the planning and monitoring, as I said in the beginning, that in the post-2015 development era, you have a global goals, but you are going to have your own targets, and you are going to have your own strategies to achieve those targets. So you need to have those kind of capacities to prepare those strategies and be able to set the targets in line with the socio-economic conditions of the country. Second issue on this means of implementation is with regard to technology development and transfer. So we need innovative technologies. Technologies essentially in the domain of the private sector. So basically there is a strong need to build partnership with public and private partnership. But at the same time, in any country, if you want to promote the use of technology, I think the local private sector also has to come forward. So what we see is here is a big gap between, let's say, the private sector of developed countries and the private sector of developing countries. So I think government needs to put in place the policies which basically could contribute in narrowing this gap. And the scaling up of the proven technology, it's not that, as I was saying earlier, that we have not done anything over the last 30, 40, 50 or 100 years. People have been working. There are a lot of things which have proven to be successful, but the issue is basically we have not really been able to scale up those successful practices. In terms of the resources, the role of the ODA is going to be a little bit changed in the future. It is going to serve more as a leverage to get private sector resources, and then there is a more and more focus on improving the domestic resource mobilization. I think that's going to be the name of the game in the post-2015 development era, that domestic resource mobilization, better taxation policy, better monetary policies, eliminating corruptions, and so on and so forth. It's not going to happen that the ODA is just going to. ODA would do certain function, as I mentioned, leveraging the private sector resources. So on the final thing is on the monitoring and reporting, and I think earlier mentioned is that it's going to require huge resources. Here we are just talking about, for instance, on the water goal. But can you imagine, if we are talking about all the, I don't know how many goals are going to be there, 8, 9 or 10s, but if you try to bring them all together, then basically how much their monitoring would become expensive, and it's going to cost a hell lot of money too. And in my concluding remarks, just which are 3, one is that the preparatory process for the SDG and the MDG. When the MDG came, they just came from sky. They were not debated, they were not discussed, they were not negotiated. There was a Millennium Development Summit. Out of summit, there is document came. And within document here and there, there were some commitments, and there were certain other commitments which were before that into Agenda 21, and basically the UN compiled those things and presented it to the governments as a Millennium Development Goals. But those were never negotiated and never discussed. There were no background studies done that what we need to do in terms of achieving those goals. But the SDG process is very transparent. I think everybody in the world knows something is going on. A lot of background material and analysis is being prepared. And I think on water and water goal, basically we have a study here in the back of the room which was done. The second issue is with regard to the backing of sustainable development governance and sustainable development agenda. And the four things which I mentioned, which was the capacity building, technology development and transfer, resource mobilization, and monitoring and reporting. I think that would serve as a bridge between the governance. Otherwise governance is not going to do anything. So these are the means of implementation. These things need to be made available to the implementation actors, and only then you would be able to monitor. Third one is the national constituency. This last comment I made earlier, that basically at the country level, the agenda was almost owned by the Ministry of Environment. In my view, that's wrong. In my view, basically the Ministries of Planning and Development, where basically all the different agendas come together, like social agenda, like economic agenda, like environment agenda. So they are the better interlocutors at the national level to the global process, which is the high-level political forum on sustainable development, rather than just the Ministry of Environment. And last thing is the scaling up of good practices. I think we have a lot of literature, and we have so many examples that what things have worked in the past and under what conditions. But I think biggest failure I usually call is that we were not really able to scale up those practices. Either it could be due to whether the resources are not available or the technologies are not available, or there might be other factors. But thing is, there is a knowledge, there is something which we know it can work, but it is up to us that basically how we put into practice and how we could scale up. The story of Green Revolution in South Asia, it was a story of scaling up. And there are many other things of that sort. So with that, I'm just going to conclude my presentation, and I'm ready to take questions. Thank you.